From tracking cabs to clouds, have you thought about how location data has become an integral part of our everyday lives? If you're interested in knowing the science of location better, our Introduction to Geospatial Science and Technology course is the perfect starting point for you. Designed for curious minds from all disciplines, perfect for newcomers and working professionals, this course unpacks the science and real world applications behind geospatial technology. Don't miss the chance to learn from the best in the field. Applications closing on 7 June.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of All Things Policy. My name is Kripa Koshy, and I'm a program manager here at Takshashila. And today I have the pleasure of being joined by two guests to discuss a really interesting topic, particularly looking at the role of the Finance Commission in strengthening judicial reform. So in our time together with my guests, who I'll introduce in a moment, we're actually going to focus a little bit on the budgeting process, the allocation of funds to the judiciary. And in fact, both my guests today have worked on a paper that's been published in the Indian Public Policy Review. So I'm not going to keep folks in suspense. I'm going to introduce our guests who are here with me today. So first, I'd like to introduce Surya, who is a program director and fellow at DAKSH, India. Surya is a chartered accountant and a law graduate who moved to DAKSH in December 2015 after a long stint in the corporate sector. Welcome, Surya.
Hi. Thanks for this, Kripa.
Welcome. So lovely to have you. Rohith is our second guest, who's a data analyst at DAKSH. Rohith is a public policy professional with experience in policy research and consulting. He has a master's in public policy from the National Law School of India University and a BCom from Christ University, Bangalore. His areas of research are state capacity building, governance, youth development, and rural economy. Welcome, Rohith.
Thank you, Kripa. Thank you for having us here.
Super lovely to have you both. So as I sort of foreshadowed a little bit, the scope of our discussion today is going to be how to sort of strengthen judicial reform and the role of the Finance Commission therein. The research that you both have particularly done focuses on, a really interesting stat that I'm going to open with, and then we'll jump into some question time. But essentially, from the research you've done, it sort of notes here that, there's a combined expenditure on the judiciary by both the union and state governments actually just sat at 0.14% of GDP in 2024-25, right? So we're going to unpack what that number means. Are we concerned by that number? Are we happy about that number? And where sort of we see some scope for potential improvement as well, right? So I'll just kick things off and feel free to jump in with your response here. Very basic question, for our listeners here. From the research that you've done, you sort of talk about why, a lack of budgetary allocation makes for an unhealthy judiciary ultimately. But why should we care about the judiciary? Why do we care about the health of the judiciary to begin with?
Let me take that, Kripa. So, judiciary is an institution that upholds a rule of law in the society. Rule of law is what separates a civilized society from other forms of humankind. There are various degrees of rule of law. You could have even rule by law. What we're talking about is upholding the spirit of the Constitution, upholding fundamental rights and democratic principles. When you have an institution that is tasked with that objective, then the way it is functioning is critical for all aspects of society, whether it's social harmony, whether it is economic well-being, whether it is environment. The implications are widespread. Ripple effects are seen much later in time, far from where the cause actually happens. So the functioning of the judiciary is critical for any society, but more so where India is currently. It's growing fast economically. There are some social, can you say, inflection points. So, and the judiciary is made to act as a balancing force in the larger scheme of things. So we should all be worried about how the courts are upholding rule of law and responding to questions being asked to them as each of us citizens.
Thank you for that, Surya. I think you've made a compelling argument already to begin with, but I'll turn to Rohit if there's anything you'd like to add, Rohit.
Yeah, I think Surya covered the basics, why we require, unpack that very important question. But yeah, I think if I would say as an Indian citizen, the basic, contract that we have signed with the Indian government, that's the Indian constitution. The preamble mentions the word justice. So social, political, and economic. So we have emphasis on all those three. Many of them miss the economic aspect because that courts have an impact on the economy also. So that's I think one more reason why people have to be concerned about the health of the judiciary.
So maybe if you don't mind, Rohit, I know you touched on the economic growth aspect. Could you maybe elaborate briefly why you sort of see that connection with the health of judiciary?
Yeah, sure. I think
how it affects.
Yeah, I think when you look at the academic the literature, also what the Indian government has done, right? So if you see Arvind Panakar in one of his books, I think Emerging Giant, right? He did mention that the NCLTs, right, National Company Law Tribunal, so they are very important in order to improve the speed of disposal of cases when it pertains to economic offenses or anything on those kinds, right? So that will bring in more business. The ease of doing business will improve. Investments will be brought in. So if investments are brought in, then it's beneficial for the people because the employment rises. So that way, economic justice also happens. So that is one. When you have in academic literature, if you see the basics like Douglas North's institutions, it mentions the importance of legal institutions on economic growth. And many several, we have mentioned in the paper also, like how judicial independence has an impact on the economic growth.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful for listeners who might not have been able to explicitly make that connection,
Yeah.
So maybe then I'll just proceed to our next question here, which ties into what we were saying in the introduction, this allocation of, or what percentage really of the GDP is allocated toward the judiciary. From our sense is that that's not maybe good number that we want to see, right? So what would you say sort of an ideal budget allocation, or what proportion really of GDP do you think would be an appropriate allocation if we're talking about support for the judiciary? And then maybe in that vein as well, what would you say would be the features of a well-funded judiciary? Because again, we're assuming that at the 0.14%, it's not in fact a well-funded percentage. Yeah.
Yeah. Take that question. I think that question, like what is the ideal percentage, right? When you look at GDP, first of all, it was very hard to find out what was the percentage GDP expenditure on judiciary of other countries. For India also, we had to calculate taking the budget numbers and all that. And then, if I would like give a comparison, the European countries, right, most of them spend 0.31% of the GDP, and India spends 0.14. The thing is that being a developing country, we can't. We have a lot of competing, thing also, right, requirements. We have health and education that takes the highest priority. And then when you have several other development indicators, then comes judiciary. But the thing is that what we can see, why we give that number of 0.31% is we can aspire towards that particular number. Necessarily not that much, but we can aspire towards that. And with the second question being, what are the features of a well-funded judiciary? I think that is where I think we need to look at. It is not the amount only, but the quality of expenditure. So first thing is address what are the major challenges. We have a huge vacancy in the judges, in the court staff. So we have mentioned in the paper also that around 33% of the high court judges, the posts are lying vacant. And in the district court, it is around 20%. And in Supreme Court, we have a certain percentage of vacancy. And another aspect is the court staff. Many people do not look at court staff. They are the ones who make the engine go. The engine run. Yeah, it's not in the judges. So you have a vacancy of, I think, 26.7% is what we found out when we're writing the paper. So basic things like that should be addressed, the human resource requirements. And I think secondly, is the quality of funds. I just look at the Karnataka budget for administrative justice, and it was around 84% was only on salary and allied expenditure, like office expenses and all that.
Wow.
And capital expenditure was only around 7 to 8%. And this is a common pattern throughout the the High Courts and Supreme Court also. I mean, despite e-courts phase 3 being brought in this union level. But I think the capital expenditure amount should increase. I mean, that is how you can have an improvement in the processes and the
Right.
operations.
Yeah, so just for those who are listening in, the e-courts phase 3 is sort of a technological investment, I understand, that's been made from the side of the union government. Yeah. So I actually, if you don't mind, Rohit, I wanted to ask, a passing question. I know you made reference to, potential benchmark you're looking at, and it was challenging to sort of find those numbers exactly of GDP allocation towards, judiciary. Any particular reason, apart from maybe the obvious that it was most readily available, but why European countries were used as that benchmark, saying that, look, they're spending 0.31%. Do you feel like it's a fair comparison for us to even use that? Is that even a relevant benchmark for our context, or is it just, it's nice to have something aspirational regardless of how different the context might be?
Yeah. So I think we did mention in one of the points about Federica Villapiana. I mean, she had shown about how judicial independence has an impact on economic growth and all those aspects, and how it's very important, right? So she did mention that European unions, even though they spend quite a lot, they don't have they have the same issues with India. The budgeting question of judiciary does not get that much of visibility. But of late, the thing is that you have organizations like CEPJ. So it's a European Union-based organization which deals about justice, judicial system. So she mentioned that when that CPJ is raising that question, about how budgeting in judiciary is very important, we have to look at that. So that is why I felt the European Union numbers in the European countries was very important. And I think it was one of the highest. If you see globally also, United States around 0.21% of GDP. And but European Union spends much more. So that's why I thought that might be a gold standard in our comparison.
Yeah, interesting. I think giving us a little bit to chew on over there. Thank you. I think, Surya, is there anything that you'd like to add on that?
So India is, whether it's fourth or fifth is a debate, but we are such a large economy now that it would be unfair if we only leave the comparison at the size of the economy and not the constituents elements of that economy or the society or the state. So as we move towards becoming more powerful economically, we have to start comparing our institutional structures and mechanisms for the functioning of those institutions with the other developed is the commonly used word, so we will use that, economies. So there is absolutely nothing wrong in holding ourselves to the standards. If we keep saying that we are the fourth or fifth largest economy, we will be third very soon. Yeah. So what does it mean in the next level?
Yeah. I think that's a helpful sort of point to include as well. So I'm just going to sort of transition our conversation now to the Finance Commission, right? We made reference to it early on here that a big player that we kind of see who could be involved at remedying some of these challenges that we know that judicial systems are facing across the country is the Finance Commission could play a role here, right? So where does the Finance Commission sort of feature in this conversation when we are speaking of the judiciary? Where do you see them having a role to step in, to respond to some of these? Again, at a very high level, we talked about some of those challenges, but what really would the Finance Commission do here?
The first question is, like how we pointed out, why the Finance Commission at all? Because the funds are in the hands of the central government and the state government. What role does the Finance Commission have to play in balancing out this? That's a question that we have answered in our paper, that because rule of law is so important, that it cannot be left only to the downstream, as after other sectors, because it is such a foundational element of the Indian state. It has to come as a priority higher up in the priority. Once you do that and you realize that there is both a horizontal variation and a vertical disparity in the functioning of the and the allocation of funds to the judiciary, then you start thinking about which institution is best equipped to balance these disparities. That is when we come to the realization that the Finance Commission, because it is upstream to allocation of funds to other sectors, can play a very pivotal role. The Finance Commission itself has recognized this role and has in the past taken up on its own the need to allocate funds to the judiciary. So it's not something new. We are not something suggesting something radical or out of the way for the Finance Commission. We What we are suggesting is a departure from what it has done in the past in the details, but not in the mandate itself, and therefore it's a natural progression. And how and the why is what the discussion should be about, and which we will go through in the next few minutes in our conversation.
Yeah, fabulous. I think it's a really helpful nuance to introduce there, that what's being sort of proposed here is not outside of the mandate really of the Finance Commission itself, but rather, like you were saying, getting into some of the finer details, and the implementation might look slightly different here, right? Rohith, is there anything you wanted to add on that particular point?
Yeah, I didn't. I just wanted to give a basic. This is something which, I think Surya and I we keep discussing. How do you just put across a point? Because many of the common citizens think Finance Commission deals with the distribution of tax from the central level to the state level, right? That is how often you see in the media that states are requesting for more devolution of funds, and then how do you do that? Is from vertical, horizontally. How do you divide those funds, right? I think so. I just wanted to explain where the grants come into the picture is in the term revenue deficit in grants or grants in aid. So that gains the power constitutionally from Article 275. So what Article 275 states is that the union can give revenue grants to the states in case of any expenditure, like important revenue expenditure, right? And the example, just why this revenue grant comes into the picture is that, so you have states, you have different economic paradigms, like the development paradigms for each. Karnataka might grow very, very fast, and the mining state like Jharkhand might not grow. But each of them have their own obligation towards citizens, right? On health and development, other development activities, but they might not have the revenue power. So that is where I think the Finance Commission gives grants, and then of late, like Surya mentioned, it has been going towards certain sectors also. From 12th Finance Commission onward, they have been mentioning to give it to certain sectors, and like judiciary came into the picture in 13th Finance Commission. And the reason why judiciary has been coming into the picture is like 15th Finance Commission gave very, like, in a very single line, that the judiciary is very important for administration and governance of the country, and also for the economy. So these very fundamental questions was considered by the Finance Commission, and that is why you have these sectoral grants being given. Like if I would like to make it easier for the audience to understand.
Yeah, I think that helps, sort of allows us to sort of follow the thread over there with, I think, some practical examples there I think were definitely helpful. And just a note, I guess, to listeners, I know at one point we did touch on this idea of a disparity, a horizontal and vertical disparity. So don't fear, we will cover that at length in a few moments. But so I'm going to turn to another question then, actually. So, we've talked about now a fair bit of like fund allocation, and another sort of interesting statistic is, the fact that only 20% of the funds that were recommended by the 13th Finance Commission, for example, towards the judiciary were utilized, right? So that seems like a concerning case of sort of some underutilization, significant underutilization, in fact. So maybe I'll start, Rohith, by asking you, what would you say are sort of the core sort of fundamental issues for why some of these funds are being underutilized?
I think one of the core issues is that the planning which goes into this fund allocation, right? That's not the best. You can see the planning, and then because the planning has to go towards also to what we require, the requirements, the demands from the judiciary, and then second is how to implement them. Right. And I think if you take the example of 13th Finance Commission, when you had 5,000 crores being given to several particular purpose, building of morning shift courts and then judicial services, all of that, 15th Commission gave it only for one particular purpose, that is fast track special courts for specific cases. And the thing is that when you have the funds being proposed by the DOJ, one of the main aspects is that I would want the audience to understand that the sectoral grants, when it's given to judiciary, these are based on the conversation between the Department of Justice, which is part of the Ministry of Law and Justice, right? and the Finance Commission. You don't have the direct engagement between the Finance Commission and the Department of Justice happening. So very often the planning, you have gaps in the planning there and the implementation. And so that is where I think the underutilization aspect comes. So another thing is the capability of the judiciary. I mean, if I would like to give an example, one example which we gave in the paper is that 13th Finance Commission gave 5,000 crores to the judiciary. And the CAG, in one of the performance audits of like one of the courts, Kerala High Court, so they said that the first tranche of that money to Kerala was given, 41 crores, I think, if I'm not wrong. And then for the second tranche to be given to Kerala High Court, the Kerala High Court and the Kerala government had to prepare one strategic litigation plan so as to create a plan to reduce the government litigation in the courts. But they were not able to do it within that period. So that kept going, kept getting delayed. So I think they were able to get only the second tranche, a part of the second tranche, and ultimately it was a very low utilization there. So that's one thing. The capability of, because the courts are really busy with disposing of cases, hearing cases, and basically everyone is busy within the courts, and sometimes it is no one's baby. I mean, that is the problem. Yeah.
Like a hot potato that just passes from one person to the other. I'm going to not be offended, Rohit, that you use Kerala as an example, as a Malayali myself.
I am also Malayali.
Yeah, that's for.
we should be equally insulted, both of us. No, I'm of course only kidding, but I think it was a really helpful example, I think, to outline why there might be the best of intentions, of course, in some of this playing out, and yet the context and situation is such that it might be.
Kripa, I mean, if I would like to add, the reason why I told Kerala is that very few audits have been done on courts. That's one major issue which we identified. The CAG has not been able to do many of the audits, and the High Court was open to these kind of questions.
Right.
I think that's a good thing for, like, we can be happy with Kerala's open.
That is true.
Just to clarify, we are seeing some very exciting things being done by the Kerala High Court. So what the audit covered a period much before the exciting developments that we are seeing of late. So there's nothing to be insulted by, actually.
Maybe my language is too strong.
So, like how Rohit pointed out, I'll just add 2 points to it. There are very few C&AG audits on the functioning of the judiciary from a budgetary perspective and from the performance perspective. It raises important questions on interinstitutional relationships, because these are constitutional bodies by themselves, right? C&AG is a constitutional authority. You have a separate wing called the judiciary. How are they talking to each other? How are they interacting with each other? How do they perceive each other? If judiciary can pass orders on the functioning of the C&AG, how is C&AG viewing the functioning of the judiciary? Raises some larger institutional questions for a democracy like India. But to reiterate the point on underutilization that the question is about, underutilization is only a symptom. It is a symptom of a larger malaise, which is a lack of a comprehensive, holistic vision at the High Court level. Because ultimately, administration of justice in India are the responsibilities of various high courts. The high courts lack a comprehensive vision for what they should do in the next 5 years. Like many other sectoral plans, there is no vision for administration of justice. And that is showing up in many things, of which underutilization is one. Lack of capacity to implement what has been asked for is also a factor that plays into it. But if you don't have a plan, you're just going with what comes.
Yeah, I think it's a helpful nuance to sort of introduce here, that actually, as much as we can sort of harp on the idea of underutilization, that it should actually be like a canary in the coal mine, pointing to something bigger maybe that may need to be examined, right? And especially if our conversation here is about reform. That's a pretty strong word. We want for transformation actually to be seen, and not for Band-Aid solutions necessarily, right? So I think it's a helpful perspective to keep in mind. So thank you for that. So I'm just going to, touch on another point that you had mentioned earlier, Surya, and you foreshadowed for folks who are listening here, this idea of inequality in budgeting, in both having both a horizontal and a vertical disparity, these two elements to it, right? So as I understand understand, in 2024-25, the union government contributed only, about 6% or so to the All India judiciary budget, and that the remaining, 94% or so was actually contributed by the states, right? So this really is the vertical disparity you were speaking of. And then the horizontal disparity that you've done some research on is the spending between or among states, sort of, right? So the example of Delhi was pulled up where, only a 4% or so of their budget was spent on the judiciary. And then on the other end of that, that spectrum, to show the sharp contrast, we have Maharashtra that's spending about 0.31% actually of their budget on the judiciary. So that would be as you were saying, the horizontal sort of component of it. But really, I think my question here is, how does the Finance Commission respond to these very distinct disparities, and it is a fairly complex situation that we find ourselves in. So maybe I'll turn to Rohith maybe for your thoughts first.
Yeah. So I think one of the main principles which one of the Finance Commission placed to decide on how much grants to give, on why should we give grants, right, was the delivery of basic services. So basic services in each state, right, should be of fairly equal quantity or good quality. So delivery of justice is one of the basic, obligation of the states, right? State meaning like government. So state government in India, if you see constitutionally, both the union government and the state governments are responsible for the High Court, Supreme Court, and all that respectively. So that is where I think the Finance Commission comes in, because if there is disparity in the expenditure by the different states, and then Finance Commission has taken cognizance of this in the past, and I think this is something which needs to be emphasized upon. This particular horizontal disparity and vertical disparity, I think why it needs to be taken cognizance is because the 15th Finance Commission actually mentioned that the share of non-disposable taxes, right, surcharge and cess, it increased drastically from 2011 to 2022. Like if the percentage, if I would see, I think the 15th Finance Commission said that the share of surcharges and cess has gone up from 10.4% in 2011-12 to 28.1%. So when you have so much of increase in the proportion of non-disposable tax, right, I think there comes a moral obligation on part of the union government to contribute more to basic services like administration justice.
So just to supplement that, there have also been discussions on what are the disputes arising out of, or what are causing these disputes to be stuck in courts or to be taken to courts. Whether are they union government laws or actions of the union government, or how much of those are state government and local government, right? It is not yet settled, but the sense is that the union government actions and statutes also contribute significantly to the disputes, especially on the commercial side. Given that, responsibility of the institution, responsibility of the union government towards solving it should also be higher, is one perspective. This is not conclusive. There needs to be more data, and it's a research question for those who are interested. The second element of that, your question on how should the Finance Commission respond, is if we take the horizontal, we've tackled the vertical, imbalance, the horizontal imbalance. If you take each of these high court states to be their own ecosystems, who are functioning at a level that is optimal to them, it's suboptimal from expectations, but they have an equilibrium and they're functioning according to their responses in their ecosystem, then how appropriate would it be for an external hand to interfere and say, take more, right? So that raises questions on how Finance Commission is looking at balancing imbalance, at tackling imbalances in other sectors. Is it just granting more money, or is it helping those constituencies, if I can use that word, figure out what is the best way ahead for themselves? That has guided the solutions that we have come up and which we will be talking about soon.
Sure. And Surya, if I may, and tell me here if I'm out of scope, of what you could possibly answer. But do you see some good examples there of how the FC has been involved in other sectors where, their actions sort of in those domains could perhaps be replicable for how they involve themselves in the judiciary?
The example that comes immediately to mind, because it is latest, is the urban local bodies. The last Finance Commission made a brilliant suggestion where they said urban local bodies can get more funds if they can get their accounts audited within certain timeline or certain standard, right? So you're immediately, it's a conditional grant, which is it's not completely
Hmm.
clean.
It's a good
The
incentive, though.
the purists will have a view,
Hmm.
but it's a tactical, I think, brilliant one where you're putting the onus on them to come
Hmm.
clean, or stay clean, and then therefore be able to access more funds to do what you want. Something like that. We have gone a bit more. We have gone further than that. While we have said C&AG audits, we have gone and said they must be spending on systemically important institutional building stuff.
Hmm.
That's how we're thinking about it.
Yeah, I think that's a good example to pull out. Rohit, was there anything that you wanted to add on that point? Or we can proceed to...
No, I was also thinking of the same.
Yeah.
When they have given,
Oh,
what is it,
Surya,
grants? Yeah.
Surya stole your thunder, is it?
No. No.
We hadn't discussed this earlier.
Yeah.
No, but it's great, right? Actually, to me, that's quite wonderful that there is an instinctive answer that came for both of you as an example that could be looked to as potentially replicable in a different context, right? So, yeah, sorry, Rohit, not to interrupt. Go ahead.
I think the same, like what Surya said. But the question again remains is that because there's such a new thing and very important thing what Finance Commission did, right? Often you don't get, the panchayat and the municipality, they don't get that much money from the State Finance Commission. And then, so the Finance Commission took, thing into trying to improve the finances, right? But the conditionality is being there. And now the question is how many of them did follow that? So I think the audit now remains, or the assessment, like how much of money was given, how much was used. So again, the question of underutilization. So that's some very important. I think we are awaiting that particular.
Sure. And I mean, I hope we're going to remain optimistic in the waiting time, that actually the results that are yielded are fairly positive and it becomes sort of a good success story that can be used in other contexts, right? So, I mean, we're nearing the end of our time together, and, some of these topics that we've sort of covered are fairly complex. I mean, we could almost dedicate, an hour each for each of these sub themes that we've covered, but just really in the interest of time, I'm thinking we'll just focus our discussion maybe in a little bit more of a forward-looking way of potential recommendations that could be offered to the 16th Finance Commission, right? There are a number of areas where some targeted intervention would be really beneficial. But if you and I'm happy to sort of offer you the time and space to cover at a high level what some of those proposed reforms could be. But once you've sort of laid that out, if you had to land on three really that must do and should be prioritized, and it's a tough ask, because when you sort of see the landscape is sort of replete with a lot of challenges and there's a lot of scope for improvement, it might be a hard question, but I'm still going to put you in that tough position to sort of land on three to prioritize. What would those three be? So yeah, again, it would just be what recommendation for the 16th Finance Commission would you prioritize? Yeah.
I think this is where we, Rohit and I, were kind of catching up on what would be the top three, and we were not able to agree between us what are the top three. So we have like in the judicial space, a dissenting judgment. It's not dissenting, but I was thinking more of, given my corporate background, where would I spend where I can see some impact soon, so that it shows to the ecosystem that this kind of approach works. So if I take that approach on immediately possible short term, it's not short term, but you can see the impact clearly. I would put it as budgeting practices. Given my accounting background, a strong a team that is able to push back and say, why are you asking this? Why are we not asking this? How better to ask what we want? A good budgeting practices team in each high court would, I think, be very important. The other thing is tribunals. Tribunals really are a hybrid between the executive and the judiciary. They are unique institutions, but they play a very large role in the functioning of the economic, commercially important disputes. And therefore, it's possible. There are very small domain. It's not, their touch points are limited, but their impact are huge. It's possible for the Finance Commission to say, we are going to fund a national mission to revitalize tribunals and take stock after 5 years or 3 years. The third thing that I would put my money on, and something that only the Finance Commission can do, is to build a single source for law. The laws are made by all sorts of bodies: parliament, state legislatures, municipal bodies, regulators, etc. Right? So there needs to be a depository, a single, authentic, comprehensive, updated source of laws for the citizen to rely on, which is digital in nature. If you're saying that ignorance of law is not an excuse for you to claim that you didn't follow the law, then the state should do a better job of making you aware of that law. Currently, it's spread out over millions of gazette notifications. Even judges are finding it hard to find out what is the most updated version of the law. Because it is spread across 3 tiers of government, across departments, and this is systemically important, I would say, and because the state of growth of AI, the technology is so ripe for intervention, I would say they should build a single source for law for the country.
No, I think those are excellent suggestions to land on, and with all the due caveats of you coming from the corporate world and being an accountant, I think it's really helpful, right? Because it does inform your perspective of what could be a pragmatic intervention from the FC, right? Having sort of a consolidated sort of single sources to access some of that information is incredibly valuable for sure. The one question I did have before I turn over to Rohit on his points was around tribunals, right? Like, is there something also about almost strength, like as much as, there can be a revitalization of tribunals, do you feel also that is it accompanied by a sense of like decision-making capacity the tribunal holds, right? Like, are they empowered actually, once they are sort of revitalized, are they empowered actually to make choices that can be upheld meaningfully? That's sort of just a passing question I had.
Yeah, revitalization of tribunals will include many questions, many aspects. The first one should be, do we need tribunals? There has to be clarity on whether a certain kind of dispute should we go into the tribunals system at all. That itself, it needs a larger discussion, including, like how you mentioned, having the right kind of people who are able to take informed decisions that will sustain itself across levels of appeal,
Yeah.
including that.
Yeah, I think it's fair. There's a lot to sort of unpack in some of that, so we might not be able to get into it. But I am going to turn to Rohit. So, what's your pick of top 3? If you can summarize from all the many you could have picked, which would you pick?
Yeah, I think the source of dissent with Surya is because I come from a public policy perspective, right? We look at that as a system, where are the leakages happening, where can we put the fixes and all that, right? And I think the suggestion from the paper that I would like to be implemented is a little bit of long term. So one of the suggestion is the reform and research offices. So we need the judiciary to think from a medium to long term perspective. We need people who are experts in the area of data science, behavioral science, and organizational development, them to come together, assess the issues in the judiciary, what are the issues, and what might be the issues arising in the future. And then also looking at certain things like just predicting the number of cases. By looking at the crime rate, and certain metrics like that, right? And I think if you're able to do that prediction, if you're able to plan for the future, and also look at what's happening right now, what are the things in which is very very much being implemented by other wings of the government, like AI and AI/ML, right? So those things can be done by this particular office. Second, I think, which can complement the efforts by the reform office, is the capacity for technological initiative. We need people who know technology and who can understand how the improvements in operations in court can happen. So of course you have the legal experts, the judicial experts, and all of them. Then they can collaborate with the technological experts to have a better system. Right now you have, but it's a huge like a challenge for anyone to access basic websites. Of the judiciary, you have a lot of issues. How journalists access these things, and then within also, how lawyers are able to look at their cost lists and all that. So basic things like that, I think this particular initiative will take care of. Another thing, like I mentioned in the starting, is the vacancy. You have a lot of vacancy even within judicial offices and all that, court staff. So the initiative, what I think is the third initiative from my side would be a secretariat for judicial appointment, to have a specific team only to look at appointments, to look at all the processes, to expedite the process, and then ensure that we have only very minimal, if not no, vacancy in the judiciary. So these are all, if you see, from a long-term to medium perspective.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think both of you sort of presented a compelling argument for investing in both, right? Like a short-term, things that would yield short-term results to almost serve as proof of concept and might actually galvanize a little bit more support for these types of reform, as well as doing it in a thoughtful manner where there is a little bit more of a vision that's being implemented. So, understandable why I know there was a long list of things that were proposed to strike that balance. Yeah, go ahead, Surya.
Just so, Kripa, the interesting what we have suggested, apart from the revitalization of tribunals and the building of the single source for laws, which I'm sure also will not be too much off, the budgetary outlay for 5 years across 24 high courts is 1,200, 1,300 crores, right? It's nothing compared to the national budgetary outlay. Therefore, it is important for an institution like Finance Commission, like how Rohith mentioned, to think strategically long term. These are leverage points. And what it has done in the past is it has allowed for expansion of the assembly lines. It has said, set up more courts, build better courts, right? Physical infrastructure, or allowing for setting up of special courts without the underlying mechanism being any different. So they have, in our view, not been successful solutions. You need to be strategic. You need to be thinking across systems and not trying to tinker with a part of it. Otherwise, you are going to see the same result, because the system will override just one small band-aid or one small fixing of a screw or something like that.
Yeah, that's a very helpful perspective, I think. And yeah, I just really appreciate that. I think our conversation has sort of kept some of this at a bird's eye view to have that systemic overview while not losing sight of important detail and nuance that still needs to be considered when we're talking of, something pretty significant like judicial reform, right? So simply because, we might not have too much time together, I just want to wrap our conversation up over here. But my hope is that our discussion together has sort of given a fair bit of food for thought for our listeners, sort of compels people to look up a little bit more and do their own independent research, perhaps on, what judicial reform could look like, what the role of the FC or the Finance Commission could look like even in that journey. But I want to conclude by thanking both of our guests. Thank you so much, Rohith. Thank you so much, Surya, for your time. Such a pleasure to host both of you.
Thank you, Kripa.
Thank you so much, Kripa.
Thank you. And to our listeners, just stay tuned for the next episode of All Things Policy. Thank you.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.